Well, I think we're about ready to get started at 6:30, and we have our guest speaker with us on board and ready to go. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the September chapter meeting for the Rio Grande Valley Texas Master Naturalist. I am here joined with Alicia Cavazos. I'm borrowing her internet. I didn't think it would be robust enough to tackle the job, but I appreciate that. And as many of you probably know, Robert Gaitan and Barbara Pete are out of pocket today, and they asked me to pinch hit and facilitate the meeting. And since the air conditioner went out at the library, we're going to go full virtual tonight. So I'd like to thank everyone that's able to join us. I think we have about 30 participants, which is wonderful. So if anybody doesn't know who I am, I'm Susan Upton, and I was a member of the most recent class of the TMN group that graduated a few months ago for 2021. So to kick things off, I'd like to ask if we have any board members present that would like to make any announcements, and or committee chairs. And I believe Joni Gillis would like to make a few announcements.
Yes, I would like to welcome our new members, Andrew and Audrey Hicks. Andrew and Audrey, if you wouldn't mind putting video so people can see you, we'd like to welcome you to the Rio Grande Valley chapter. They come from the Rio Brazos chapter, so they transferred in. So we definitely like to welcome you all. And then we would also want to welcome back Richard Loya, who left us for a little while, but he's back in our chapter now. Welcome back, Richard.
Thank you, Joni.
You bet.
Wonderful.
Glad to have all of you with us.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Well, welcome back and welcome aboard. Any other announcements from anyone within the chapter leadership group?
Hey, Sue, I need to make sure we let people know that they need to apply for the stipend so that they, I've only gotten one so far request. So if we can let everybody know that there's an opportunity for them to win a, get a stipend, to send me their request when they pay, send it to me, and then I'll send it on to Diane. And all they have to do is, write the article for the Chachkalachka.
Okay, great. If you don't mind, you could put your email address for them to communicate with you about that in the chat box.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Well, without further ado, I would like to get our program started tonight. Our guest speaker, and we really appreciate her joining us tonight virtually, kind of a last minute change, is the Park Superintendent at Resaca de la Palma State Park, Kelly Malkowski. I slowed down the last name there, Kelly, because I've known her for quite some time as Kelly Cummings. I don't have your actual bio with me, but I'm sure that you'll be able to circle around and include a little bit about yourself as well as you give us the presentation tonight on Resaca de la Palma. I personally am a volunteer as well as Alicia, and we go out 2 days a week and do interpretive tours from the tram loop. And we see Kelly often, and she's an Energizer bunny going after projects that she's got in such a big park. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kelly.
Wonderful. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I might add one more thing. If everyone could be sure that they are muted and maybe disable their video to improve our connection this evening. And if you have any questions, drop them in the chat box and we'll feed them to Kelly as we go. Thank you.
Perfect. So a little bit about myself. So I am the superintendent at Resaca de la Palma State Park. I started there as an interpreter, a park educator. We throw that word around a lot, but it's often not well defined. So that's the person who's designing and leading programs, interfacing with the public, scheduling groups like school groups and other volunteer groups. And at my park, they're also the volunteer coordinator. So it's a pretty complex role, and that really prepared me well to transition into my current role where I'm the park superintendent. The park itself is 1,200 acres of state-owned property and then another 200 acres of federal lands that we act as a steward of. So all in all, we're the largest of the 3 parks in the valley, but much, much smaller than, say, like Laguna Atascosa. So my presentation tonight will be mostly about like what kind of stuff that you can see in my park. So if you have any questions, feel free. I am a fast talker. I feel like I prepared a bunch of slides, but if I talk too fast or you need me to repeat something, or if the connection gets bad, just drop it in the chat and someone let me know and we'll circle back to it. So what's neat about Resaca de la Palma State Park? In my title slide, I have the super handsome Harris's hawk. They're one of my favorite predatory birds in the park. They're just really neat and they have super cool behavior to observe. Generally, they're with other Harris hawks. They're pack hunters. So generally one's the lookout and the other's the swoop and kill, and then they share in the food. And because of that, they're also a very popular hawk for falconry people who go out and do all of the work to be able to obtain and interact and either use them for educational purposes or hunting. So they're just a super, super neat bird. Come on, slideshow. Why are you not slideshowing? There we go. So I dropped in here the Tpwd Mission. I'm not sure if it's something that has been shown to you before. I imagine it has, but I just wanted to pop it in there. And this is the guiding light of my job. So whenever I have to pause and think about something, we always circle back to this mission. What can I do to help preserve our natural and cultural resources? How can I help promote hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation? What can I do to help create generational stewards? So when we have field trips, when I get that kindergartner from a local Brownsville ISD grade school, like what can I instill in them that maybe they take with them all the way into adulthood? Because I distinctly remember my field trips to fish and wildlife sites in Illinois. I grew up in Southern Illinois. The Shawnee National Forest was a huge part of my my upbringing. So when I go forward and I talk to these students, that's something that I try to bring to them. But it also touches on a big thing that happens in my park in September: public hunting. This is a really mixed bag. So I have some folks who are very excited about it, and I have a lot of folks who are like, this makes me feel uncomfortable. And I always try to have the conversation that one, it does fit into our mission. We are, Tpwd does encourage our hunting heritage. And the other piece is the Pitman Robertson Act. If you've heard of that act before, can you drop like a hand, an emoji in the chat? Anybody? Okay, so okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. This is actually a very, very neat model and something that came out in the early 1900s. It's one of those pivotal pieces of legislation that allowed us to preserve game animals. So, you know, dove and deer and elk and mule deer. But that broad stroke did not really focus on non-exciting animals. It doesn't really provide funding for beetles or for ants or bees. So a lot of folks have been thinking about this pitment model, and it's only successful if a lot of people are hunting. So as that interest has waned in the last 100 years, so is the revenue. Texas receives funds from here. Many of our various states in America, they get money out of this Pitman Act. So it's been floating around here lately in the last couple of years has been something called the backpack tax. I'll try to drop this slideshow in the chat, or I'll send it in an email so it can be distributed. But this is just like a great little overview. So backpack tax would be a tax on sporting good items at a federal level that would create this pool of money so we could fund projects to preserve non-exciting animals. So you're like, Kelly, why are you telling me about the Pitman? Why are you telling me about this backpack tax? Because I'm so stinking happy that Texas has already done this, but specifically for state parks. So Prop 5, November 5th of 2020, Texans across the state agreed to make the sporting goods tax money available to us every year. In years past, we'd get some of it. We wouldn't get all of it. We'd get very little. There'd be an emergency, a hurricane, and the funds in that pool would be taken away to use someplace else. But now we get it. So those projects that Susan was talking about, many of them were made possible by this. The park roof got fixed of our visitor center. The parking lot was relined and restriped. I had extra money to buy a really cool new water fountain that has a dog waterer to replace the one that we had rusted outside. So these models, beyond just charging a park admission fee, are hugely important to how state parks operate, what we can do, the level of conservation, how we can best serve the public that comes to our park. So I just wanted to touch base. If maybe you looked at our Facebook and you're like, wow, 10 days of September, I can't come because they're closed for hunting. It's like, well, we're just trying to make sure that we are fulfilling those missions and also taking advantage of those funding models as best we can. So if any of you were with me with the TMN training group last year, I did a talk about trees. So I just wanted to touch on some of those trees in this, this PowerPoint so we could either refresh your memory if it's been a bit since you've done a tree walk, or maybe have some conversations about your favorite trees in the Rio Grande Valley. In this picture, we can see some decaying seed pods from Texas ebonies. My park is home to about 350 acres of ebony and aqua woodlands. I would make the argument that maybe like 280 of them are mature. Other sections were revegetated in the 70s, and those trees just are not doing as well as our old growth. It's one of the things that I think is the best thing about the park. When people ask me what's special about my park, I always say the ebony and aqua woodlands, because only 1% of that habitat remains globally. So as the Rio Grande Valley industrialized in the early 1900s, most of it was either plowed under or burned out to make room for farmlands. We kind of see a similar process happening in the Amazon rainforest right now. And you can think about the two habitats, ours, Rio Grande Valley, subtropical, Amazon, tropical, but a similar level of biodiversity, a similar level of habitat that's able to support a wide swath of creatures. I also like that the seed pods can be used for everything from like a little maraca to you can grind it up as a coffee substitute, or some kids told me you can take the seeds when they're really hard and rub them on concrete and then burn each other with them, which tells me that anything is a game if you try hard enough. You can turn anything into a toy. Another tree that I really think is pretty charming are the cedar elms that we see across the valley. We have these in the park, and I love them because I grew up in the Midwest. I'm a Midwesterner at heart, and I love fall. And there are very few trees in the Rio Grande Valley that lose their leaves in the winter. And these cedar elms kind of do that. It all depends on how cold it is and if it's been a wet or dry year so far on how many will drop at once. But they give me that little satisfaction of like stepping on crunchy leaves. And they also are very sharp and serrate. So if you look at that picture, they're very pokey, pointy leaves. My park is named Resaca de la Palma. I have a big Resaca, but not very many palms. So sable palms are the native palm tree of South Texas. The other palms that we see in the Rio Grande Valley are all imports. Now we can talk about the difference between a plant that is naturalized, a plant that is non-invasive, and a plant that is invasive. I see a lot of use and benefit to the Washingtonians. They're great nesting habitats for woodpeckers and for parrots, both species of birds that I really enjoy watching as a birder. All of their fronds make beautiful nesting material. It is incredibly fun to watch an oriole go up to a palm, pull off the old strings from the old fronds, and then fly off to her nesting site and start weaving them. So to me, pretty much every palm is a good palm, as long as it's kind of left in its natural state. It's a little bit hard when I see naked trunked palms that are young, that I know that those just haven't fallen off over time, that they were manicured to look that way, because all I think is, oh, that was great nesting material, or oh, that's a wonderful spot for a tired bat to rest. So I hold a special place in my heart for the sable palms. If you want to see great palm groves, and maybe y'all have already been to these sites, but the Sable Palm Sanctuary in Brownsville, or the Audubon site, Fonterra Audubon over in Weslaco, immensely jealous. When I go there, I'm like, oh, yeah, your palms are so great. Why can't I have a great palm grove like that? And a lot of it is just the nature of my park and the parts of my park that were plowed under to create space for either grazing animals or row crops. Mexican ash. If you have ever been to my park and you've hiked our park loop, we have a beautiful Mexican ash tree. It is big and burly and wild and multi-trunked. We had it measured 2 years ago by A&M Forest Service to see if maybe we were the largest Mexican ash on public property, because the other 3 that are really big are all on private property. And I was gonna like sell the heck out of that, but we're not that big. We're not as big as I thought we were, mostly because we have a forked trunk. So I'm gonna try again in 3 years and see if we haven't like beaten somebody. So spiny hackberry or Grande, it's very, very pokey, but it produces these beautiful, beautiful berries. Those can be great for animals metabolically. A lot of creatures don't necessarily drink water the way we drink it. They're going to eat it. So these berries are all over the place. They start to eat them. That's a great way for those seeds to get dispersed. So it's a really good strategy on the plant's part. But this is one of those food sources that early inhabitants of the Rio Grande Valley really took advantage of. And on the side, I don't know if y'all want to do a screenshot, is a hackberry jam recipe I found. So I've heard from many park visitors, especially the older folks, the grandmothers and grandfathers coming out with their kids, where they talk about either their parents making this jam or them as children painstakingly collecting the berries to make it. I know that we have blueberry jam and they're comparable in size, a little bigger, but I just think about how long little fingers would have to pick those berries to make a pint of hackberry jam. If you had to ask me to pick my favorite showy tree of the Rio Grande Valley, hands down, every day, I'm going to tell you Mexican olive. I just love them. And I had a lot of great pictures from our olives in the park, but none of them were nearly as showy as this one. This is clearly somebody's yard plant. This is not a plant that has to like hack it in the wild, survive droughts, survive awful seasons. This tree is so immaculately beautiful. And it displays one of the things I like best about them, and that's their tolerability. So if you look, it's really shrubby, has lots of trunks. Probably for years, this one was trained to be small and as a shrub, and it's just gotten bigger and bigger over time. So you could put one in a pot on your front porch and train it, and it could stay small like a shrub, or you plug it in the ground and you give it enough water and time, and they grow into these beautiful trees. I like the blossoms because they're really attractive to pollinators. So if you're a bee, a butterfly, a hummingbird, they'll come into that. And then once the flowers cycle through, it'll produce a fruit. And that fruit is pretty good for a lot of our creatures. So many things will stop and eat them. You can think about like raccoons or possums. If we had deer in the park, we don't. They would maybe eat them. And humans can with caution. So the plant lore that I've read is that those are good for folks that might be experiencing constipation. So if your belly is hurting, you could maybe eat 1 or 2 of them, depending on how big you are, and find some relief. But if you didn't have that problem and you just ate them, you would experience the other problem. You would have too much. You'd be visiting the restroom quite a bit. So a similar tree that can maybe be a little bit confused with a Mexican olive might be a sandpaper tree when they're in bloom. This is an artist rendition. I have not ever once seen a sandpaper tree this well blossomed, and that includes this year after the winter storm when everything put on a really great show. I was like, you overdid the flowers a little bit, but I really liked the drawing and the berries. So sandpaper trees are really have a rough tactile leaf. It's great if you're out on a tour with kids or if you're with somebody who might have a visual impairment. It's a good thing that they can touch and interact with. That's not going to cause any harm. It's not a leaf that really causes irritants to many people. So you can feel it. You can talk about how in the past folks would use those to maybe like scrub their nails or buff their elbows, get ready to go to town. Those little birds or those little berries are great for our smaller bird friends. So if you're a small bird with a smaller beak and you like to eat fruit, a sandpaper tree and a knockwit tree is going to be a pretty good deal for you. As someone who did not grow up in the valley, I've had to learn like names for lots of plants, both in English and in Spanish. So a sandpaper tree is an anacua, a Mexican olive tree is an anaquanita, the spiny hackberry or grangenio. So sometimes you might come across that where you're engaging with someone and they'll list a name that's not familiar to you, but very well regionally, it could be called that for generations. And it's just that in English, it has a different name, but it's always a great story. People always have a great story if they're telling you the name in Spanish, and then you wait them out and they'll tell you something neat. Alrighty, this one I think is like an unsung hero. So this is a Resaca. I have seen them this bloomed out. I think Resaces are beautiful when they put on their flowers. They get some hate, I will say, because they produce a seed pod that, unlike the ebony trees, are really easy to break. It's a very satisfying crunch when you sit on those seed pods, but it gets everywhere, just everywhere. Those little seeds are everywhere. The seed pods are everywhere. They do have a spine on their limb, so that falls and you have to deal with it. But they attract loads and loads and loads of insects. So those flowers are out, the insects come, and then they'll just be plumb full of warblers. And they're not so leafy. So it's a fairly sparse leaf, sparse flower. So you can see around them. You can still bird a tree like that that's really like full of birds and not lose them behind the leaves, or you can get a good picture of them where they're like in front of a flower looking very pretty. So, funny story, I do not have a great sense of smell. So all the time people are like, oh, it smells so good, it smells so good. My nose is really good at smelling like dead stuff, vomit, poop. I do not have the receptors in my nose that smell like good sweet stuff. Just stinky, rotten, dead stuff is what I can very efficiently find with my nose. From Joni's comment, that might have seemed a little random, but Joni's comment popped up about Chanel No. 5 being made out of Resaca flowers. So another tree that I have like a mixed feeling relationship with are Tpwds. They get really, really big. In English, they're often called like a lead tree because they're really heavy, but I just like saying Tpwd more than I like saying lead tree, so I stick with the Spanish on that one. They get big, they get tall, they're very beautiful. I have a super handsome one on the way into my park, but they're short-lived, 30-ish years, and they're really susceptible to wind damage. So we just had this past rainstorm. I'm already ticking in my head where I think I bet those four Tpwds are down and we're gonna have to get the chainsaws out to bust them up. Or, oh man, I hope that this one did okay in this wind event and didn't fall down, because that one's gonna be so much work to clear. So while they're neat and they're tall and they're not spiny, they're very handsome trees. They're also immensely problematic in my park, and not something that I would suggest to put in a yard. I would never encourage somebody to grow a Tpwd because they just don't grow deep enough roots and they fall over pretty easy. I would rather see like a mesquite instead of a Tpwd. So we do have some non-natives in the valley that can be pretty problematic, and I just picked a couple that are problematic in my park that we constantly fight the good fight against. The Brazilian pepper tree is one of them. You can see it has those little red berries that look like peppercorn, and that's why it's so successful. So those seed pods come off, they float, they're distributed by birds and wildlife. They're a pioneering species, so it doesn't take much for them to get established and do very well. We fight them back every year. We fight them in the Resacas, we fight them on the trails. I feel like we're a little bit winning right now, but I should bite my tongue because I'm sure I'll show up and I'll look for them tomorrow and be like, oh, heck, there's some baby ones. Another one is a Papanak, which looks pretty similar to the Tpwd. They have similar leaf structures, similar seed pods, just as problematic. They grow faster than our native Tpwds, and all of the troubles you have with them, you can also see with these Papanak. I would say we've done better at getting rid of these guys. We've eliminated more of those, and I feel less concerned that they're going to pop up. So on this slide, we have, they call them the dirty dozen. So our 12 most invasive plants that we see in the South Texas plains. I imagine some of these are very familiar to you. The pepper tree that I just mentioned, Papanak, are on there. salt cedar, the KR blue stem. I have a huge, beautiful 250-acre grassland that is completely inundated. We're lucky if we go out and we do a check to find even buffalo grass, which is not much better. It's still kind of not native, but it's more productive for more species than just that KR blue stem. And again, you can go and check some of these out. So we had a pretty big freeze, right? We've had a really interesting year for weather. So we had the winter storm Uri. This was something that was really interesting for the last group that I spoke to. So in 83 and 89, and for those of you I heard during the chat that were here in the Valley, maybe you saw this happen, but a lot of the palms died off. Mexican fan palms, the Washingtonians, the date palms, even the citrus producers had a really hard time. So doing that research, I was emotionally prepared to lose the few Washingtonians I have in the park and maybe see some damage to our sables. And it really didn't happen. Our palms did fine. We did have burns. So some of the palm fronds were scalded from the cold. They looked ugly and droopy. We left them because they fell apart and that created more nesting material for our bird friends. But all in all, I was super grateful and very surprised because a lot of the research I did was doom and gloom. I was prepared for a lot of our palms to die when we already don't have that many to begin with. I was like, how can we rework the name? Maybe we just say Resaca soon to have palmas. What do we tell the public if they can't see a palm tree here? Maybe we just get one in a pot for the lobby. And it didn't happen. And I can show them some beautiful, handsome. Some are mature, some are babies. But it didn't turn into the palm apocalypse like I thought it was going to be. So we did have some plants that were pretty heavily impacted. So we had a heartleaf hibiscus in our garden that didn't make it through. Our Tpwd did lose limbs, but I expected that anyways. I expected them to have damage from the cold, and we did a lot of cleanup. And it showed us some of those trees that were already weaker, so we could give them some preventative haircuts to hopefully minimize the damage from them down the road. Stuff that got a little bit like, again, scalded or burned were our native flowers, but we did not see the die-off that I was expecting. I was really expecting more die-off, and pretty much everything bounced back. We lost a couple of potato trees, but besides that, everybody, several months out is looking pretty good. And what we did see post-freeze was some explosive flower production. So a lot of our plants went through an incredible amount of stress, and they responded to that stress by saying, let's have 1 million babies. So they put out all of these flowers. We had this big influx of easy to see pollinator activity, and then lots and lots of seed pods. So hopefully their hard work created the next generation of plants that will make it through future winter storms. And this little note, Brazilian pepper does not die. It's not cold sensitive. I wish that it was, because that would have been very handy. It would be less sweating for me and more joy for my maintenance staff. So all of our stuff that did just fine, the mesquites, the ebonies, ratama, our cenizo didn't even get burned. Our skeleton leaf goldeneye, which is one of my favorite pollinator plants. I just think they're like really cool flowers with a great name. Our passion vine surprisingly did fine. And then our Mexican ash tree, our biggest tree in the park, which I was, would be heartbroken to lose. They all weathered it like it was no big deal. Those deep roots saved them. So that was my trees. Does anybody have any trees or plant questions before I transition?
I've got one. How about Palo Blanco? Did you mention that one?
So Palo Blanco is kind of tricky because that name is used for a wide range of plants. I'll have visitors come in and say, oh yeah, Palo Blanco, and they're pointing at like a hackberry. And I'm like, Palo Blanco? ¿Qué? ¿Esta? And they're like, yeah. Or they'll point at a ratama. Or so like when I've Googled it, Palo Blanco absolutely is a tree, but in the Valley, that name is used like kind of ubiquitously. And I see the same thing with folks calling huizaches, small Tpwds, mesquites. They're like, that's a mesquite tree, right? Those are all mesquite trees. And I'm like, they're similar, they're in the same family, but they're not. So do you have another name for the tree that you refer to as Palo Blanco?
Sugar hackberry.
they're fine. Yep, the sugar. So when you say Palo Blanco, in my head, that's a sugar hackberry. But a lot of people are like, it's this. And I'm like, that's a ratama. It's not. It's not. But I often try hard not to dim anybody's excitement about plants. And I try to be really gentle in those disagreements, especially if it's a piece of like family lore. I don't want them to have bad information, but I also don't want to be like the ranger with her hands on her hips where it's like, I'm right and you're wrong and I know everything. And why'd you think, like, I try hard not to dim anybody's light, you know? But yeah, they did fine. They did really, really fine. Surprisingly so. I was really emotionally prepared for a lot more chainsawing than we had to do, which just shows you the resiliency of the valley. So you got that big hit.
Is it considered
ahead, sir.
native, the sugar hackberry?
Yeah, sugar hackberries. Sugar hackberries and spiny hackberries are two native hackberries of the Rio Grande Valley.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Any other tree stuff, plant stuff?
I think that's it for now.
So, can anybody guess what my most commonly asked question about animals are? Do you have any in the park? And Susan and Alicia, you can't guess because maybe you get this question often enough on the tram.
Javelina. Javelina?
Not javelina, something a little harder to see.
Rattlesnakes.
Yep. All right, y'all got it. So ocelots. Everybody is always so excited to ask if there are ocelots in the park. Our last confirmed sighting of an ocelot was in 1977. And what counts as a confirmed sighting in 2021 is much different than what we would have accepted then. So now we'd like to see either a perfectly clear photo, but preferably DNA. We want poop, we want paw print, we want environmental DNA, we want somebody tested a rubbing or a stinky spot they found on a tree that they're like, oh yeah, that's cat urine. Those are the things that it would take to confirm a recent sighting in my park, and we just don't have any of that. This picture is from the Gladys Porter Zoo from their Ocelot Festival. The best place in the Rio Grande Valley to see them for the public, and it can be challenging there is the Laguna Atascosa. I am immensely excited about the wildlife underpasses they're doing and some of the projects that are happening in the lower RGV that might connect my park to other green spaces. Because right now I'm a little bit of an island. I'm surrounded by farming fields that are rapidly developing into housing developments and little micro communities. So it would be immensely hard for me to attract an ocelot because one, my park is not quite dense enough. The lack of vegetation in several hundred of the acres of the park, it's just not that appealing to an ocelot even if they came. And how would they get here? So their ways to travel to the park are very minimal and would be fraught with crossing roads. But fingers crossed, someday it'd be super cool to have a confirmed ocelot sighting in the park. Something that I actually think is a little more plausible, a little more likely to happen would be to see a mountain lion. In the last 15 years, there have been 4 confirmed sightings in the lower Rio Grande Valley. One was actually seen on March 6th. And it was a car strike north of Harlingen. So it was walking up the expressway. A male mountain lion can walk hundreds, if not thousands of miles. Some of my favorite wildlife cameras to watch are the ones behind the Hollywood sign in LA where you can see those mountain lions. A lot of our wildlife can, to some extent, tolerate humans or figure out how to live around us as we change the habitat that they need. So as we've encroached, as we've made changes, they've made some adaptations to that. So I'd be more apt to believe somebody telling me, oh my gosh, I just saw a mountain lion in the park, more so than we're like, hey, I'm pretty sure I saw an ocelot. Another super rare dude for the whole state of Texas are jaguarundis. The, again, last confirmed sighting was in 86, and I will give away my age. That was before I was born. So is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? A little less so. We really have not had a confirmed sighting or a dead one. And that's what really makes me think that they're extirpated. So if ocelots are very rare, but they still get hit on the side of the road. Mountain lions are pretty rare for the region. They still get hit by the side of the road. In the 30 plus years since our last confirmed sighting, there's not been one dead on the side of the road. So that leads me to think that if we have them, they're very rare in small isolated pockets, or they're just not in Texas anymore. Or if they are and somebody has spotted it on private property, they've chosen to stay silent and not report it because that could potentially change the use of that property for them, or the way they would be able to interact with their property now that they have an endangered species living on it. But you know what I do have a lot of, and what I immensely enjoy watching? Bobcats. We got loads and loads of bobcats in the park. They're one of our more commonly sighted predators. It's something that you see more during mating season when they're out and about looking for each other, and then a little bit during weaning season when mama is moving about trying to teach those kittens to hunt and find their own food. The photo on the right was taken by a park visitor, and he wanted me to double check that it was not in fact an ocelot. And I was like, no, sir, but that's a heck of a good picture of a bobcat. And then on the left, that blurry photo is of our water feature in a trail cam. And from that angle, if you just had the head and the blurry eyes and the ears, I think folks might lean towards, oh, it could be an ocelot. But that really not dappled back and then spotted chest gives them away as a bobcat. So beyond those cat species, I did a whole little section just on cats of the Rio Grande Valley. I'm pretty biased, but I think my park is gorgeous. I think the landscape aspect of the park is something that isn't always as acknowledged or noticed. A lot of times people talk about the birds or they talk about running on the trails, but they don't always just talk about the scenic beauty. The photo on the top, I took literally beside our dumpster. I was like, wow, that's beautiful. The lighting is beautiful. The trees are beautiful. And then the bottom photo is of our Resaca standing on our boardwalk off of the Ebony Trail. Lighting is generally better in early morning, later evening, and that's when I took both of these pictures. One was in the morning and one was closer to evening. In the high heat of the summer, we can see the wrinkles and the crinkles of the park. It's a little more easy to notice the guinea grass, but at other parts of the day, she just shines and shimmers. We do have a decent reputation as a birding park in the Rio Grande Valley. I think we are a lot more challenging than some of the other sites. The park is really, really big, and that urbanization around us isn't complete. So when you think about like a really small site like Fonterra, which is like flanked by some neighborhoods and also a gas station, if you're a bird, you're probably going to pick that park. But at my park, if you're flushed, if you see a human, you see a predator, you got a lot of places to go. And those places might be into that dense Tamaulipan thorn scrub or back behind a couple of prickly tall trees. So I think that adds into the challenge and the amount of hiking and sweating you might have to do to get some of our cool chaser birds. But in North America, we have about 914 species. In a year in the Rio Grande Valley, you could potentially see 500, give or take. And in my park, we average about 301. Our best year, we did 312. It fluctuates a little bit with what sort of birds get blown to us in storms and how hot or cold the summer and winter are. But the photo is of a blue bunting that hung out at our water feature for most of last winter. So he was photographed, I don't know, probably 1,000 times. It was just a very charming bird that would come in and hang out and folks would get to get a peek of. I picked these just because I enjoy these photos. And I think the first one is really interesting. In the back is a Altamira Oriole, but in the front is a super cool hybrid. So that's a Cardaloxia, a Cardinal Paraloxia hybrid. It's come back to the park in the wintertime, like 4 years in a row. We did not get a confirmed sighting last year, but I'm pretty certain I saw him. I just didn't feel good enough to put it on eBird. The next bird is a northern mockingbird, the state bird of Texas, and I just love them. I just love how bold they are. I love nothing more than watching a mockingbird pull the feathers out of a caracara or off a Harris's hawk or attack a green jay. I just really enjoy their fighting spirit and how vigorous they are. Black and white warblers, probably my favorite warbler. Blackburnians are very pretty, but I always go back to the black and whites because I have a much better chance of seeing them, and I just have like that satisfaction and joy. And the last picture are some baby turkeys that posted up on a bench, and I just thought it was funny. I was like, look, their mom put them on the bench so she could go have a break. Lots of butterflies in the park. Again, these two are kind of our stars and big sellers. So on the left, we have a blue Metamark butterfly, and that photo is very zoomed in. So a blue Metamark is like about the size of my thumbnail, from bottom to top. They're a really, really small petite butterfly, or like a Mexican blue wing would probably fit comfortably across my hand. They're just a forced perspective on the photos. I didn't want anybody to walk away thinking that they were similar sized, because the blue Metamarks are very, very tiny, but we're a great site for that. About 300 species, give or take the year, and give or take how aggressively the park is butterflied. So the more eyes out looking, of course, the more you see and the more types and variations. The less folks in the park hunting for butterflies, the lower the count. Some mammal friends. So I stayed with my theme of state animals. We got a little baby armadillo. That's a state animal of Texas. A cottontail, a coyote, again in the water feature. And then one of our kind of nemesis, a feral hog in the middle of the Resaca. So feral hogs do a fair amount of damage. My biggest grump about them is that they're opportunistic omnivores. They'll put anything in their mouth and eat anybody pretty much. And that breaks my heart a little bit. And they damage the trails. If there's any little bit of water standing, they'll waller and root, and it just makes a huge, ginormous mess. Got really, really cool reptiles. I see almost once a week, I would say, an indigo. So on the bottom left, we have a Texas indigo, very, very handsome snake. You can see them in the parking lots. You can see them in the trails. They're pretty much everywhere. Texas tortoises, they're kind of more confined to the south side of the park. We see them there, but sometimes this picture was taken in the parking lot. And then we have a little green anole, which is a species in decline. We see fewer and fewer green anoles and more browns. They're just not as common as they once were. And then the last one is a Ruthvine's whip snake, and they're really, really fast. So we got super lucky to get a picture of its head, because all of the other ones were blurry and super unfocused. And there are many, many more reptiles and many, many more butterflies and birds, but this is just kind of like a broad stroke of things that I think are neat. We get cool bugs. Bees, that's a big harvester ant. And then on the bottom right is an Anaqua tortoise beetle eating an Anaqua leaf. And when they're very young, they're pretty much see-through. So you're looking through its shell into its insides. And then as they age, they harden and they lose that clear color. And then their shells are just a lot darker. But if you ever see kind of that burnt edge look and little holes eaten, you should check it out, because you might get to see some really cool beetles underneath. Dragonflies, I thought I had a great picture of a roseate skimmer, but I don't, so I used some pond hawks instead. We can get really, really lucky with our dragonflies, but it tends to be when we have great dragonfly years, it means we had a miserable mosquito season. So if it's wet enough for mosquitoes and it's wet enough for dragonflies, but then you have to suffer through being eaten alive by the mosquitoes before the dragonflies hatch out. And then you can enjoy watching the dragonflies hunt some mosquitoes. So it's a real mixed bag on that one too. And then last but not least, they asked me to talk for about 45 minutes, and that's where I'm at. That leaves us 15 minutes for thoughts, questions, philosophical musings. And I did leave my contact information if there's anything that you want to shoot me a line. So I now will open the floor if there are any questions. Oh, and the pictures of a gray kiskadee, another bird that I really like, because they're kind of rude and sort of a jerk, and they really fight with each other, and that's entertaining. They're very entertaining.
I just wanted to let everybody know, this is Alicia. I just wanted to let everybody know that Susan and I go every Wednesday and Thursday mornings, 9 and 11, if anybody wants to go for a ride. And we look for birds, look for turtles, and every week is something different. And if you've been watching our Facebook posts, I kind of post some of the pictures of what we've seen out there in the last all these months from, I don't know, we've been going since about March or so.
Mhm.
And so everybody that wants to come out, it's a great place. You did a good job. Thank you, Kelly.
And that's always my suggestion, is to find a site and fall in love with it and then follow it throughout the year, because parks change every day and there's a new like joy or adventure or something neat or something new to see or find every day. I've been at that park for 4 years and I can still go out and find something new or see a bird that I haven't seen in 2 years, or I've been trying to get better at funguses. I'm still really bad at mushroom and fungi identification, but that's like the new thing where I'm like, wow, I've never seen that slime mold before. Or, wow, I've never seen that mushroom before.
Kelly, I wanted to ask about the electronic gates. Has that been implemented yet? And if you would like to mention that.
So, you know how sometimes you win some stuff and then sometimes you lose some stuff? We installed some electric gates and we're really excited about that, because down the road, that means that the public is going to have access to our parking lot from 6 a.m. to probably 7 or 8 p.m. depending on sunset. So I've had nothing but trouble with them. We've been troubleshooting. We have another call tomorrow with the tech people that make the gate openers to see if we can't solve some of our issues. But yeah, ideally, we would have it set up so you'd be able to come in and have access and park in our parking lot before the sun comes up and after sunset, instead of us chasing you out of the parking lot at 5 or you not being able to get in until after 8 a.m. I'm hoping that we'll get some good news tomorrow in the next couple of days and we'll be able to get that sorted, but it's a work in progress. I'm sure some of y'all have had some home improvement projects that turned into a bigger fish to fry than what you thought it was going to be. And that is 100% what this gate has been.
Well, I'm sure you'll get the kinks bug, lined out of it. So no worries. We did have one question.
Sure.
What are the days that the park is closed? You said 10 days for hunting. Can you give the dates?
So this year, we did a full closure for Labor Day weekend and this past weekend. And then the next 2 weekends in September are partial closures. So that means the south side of the park, Hunter's Lane, where the access to the Resaca on that side, all of the grassland, that's closed because the hunters will be on that side. But very few come during the second half of the season. So the north side of the park will be open for regular operation. So if you come this Saturday or Sunday, you would do an abridged tram ride. You would go to the second bridge and then turn around and come back, but probably hike either Mexican Olive or the Kiskadee Trail to kind of make up the difference in the amount of time you get with the interpreter or what you're seeing.
Kelly, I have a couple of questions. I didn't understand what the name of that last snake that you showed the picture of.
Oh, let me go back. So it's oh man, too far. It's a Ruthvine's Coach Whip.
Okay.
Or sometimes
Okay.
they say Ruthvins. I've seen it spelled both ways on the internet. But
Okay.
they're speedy. They're a speedy snake.
The second question is, you mentioned the Mexican ash. Is it the same as what people call a Rio Grande ash, or are they two different trees, or is they really a tree called a Rio Grande ash?
So again, I've heard both of those used interchangeably, but off the cuff, I want to say that I think those are two separate trees.
Kelly, that's the one that we commonly call here in the valley Fresno.
Yeah, right.
Fresno,
Okay, so
which
that was
is-
my next thing, like the Fresnos and Los Fresnos. Yeah.
Yes.
I'd have to follow up and double check on that to make sure that I'm giving you the most correct information.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hey, Kelly, I was going to ask, just curious,
Sure.
when is your favorite time of year in the park and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. So it's going to be a lot of different times. I get really happy in early summer when the groove-billed anis come back. That to me says that it's summer. When we have anis in the park, I'm like, wow, we've made it another year. So that's super cool and special. They're one of my favorite migratory birds that come back every year. And then you get to watch them all summer and watch them raise up their babies. And this time of year, their juveniles are just bold and wild and careless. And you're like, I'm sure your parents raised you better than that, but they're just right in your face, and you get super great looks at them from like 8 or 10 feet because they're just fearless. And then,
Kelly, last week we had 46 on our trip, 46 group Bildani. So this is the time. If anybody wants to see them really up close and personal, this is the time to see them because they're getting ready to fatten up and head south.
last year, my last Ani was on October 28th, and the year before that, it was the 31st. So I generally expect all of them to be out by the 1st of November, is my broad stroke. And then I really think like the last 2 weeks of October, if we've had like a decently wet year, are so magical with the butterflies. Like you can walk through our butterfly garden and feel like a Disney princess because there are so many sulfur butterflies and there are like so many skippers and little skipperlings. And it's just everywhere you look, move or breathe, there's a butterfly moving around. And it's just like breathtakingly beautiful. After a good rain, if it's been dry for a while and then the ebony trees bloom out, like that's also a favorite time, but it's again, really weather dependent. I like it when the bobcat kits are out and the moms are teaching them because it's a so much better chance to see baby bobcats, and a baby bobcat is just darling. So there's just a lot. I'm a little, I mean, it's my park, so I'm biased and I think it's great a lot of times. Sometimes people are like, Kelly, what's your favorite park? And I give that pat answer that parents give. And I'm like, they're all special in their own way and they all deserve love.
So Kelly, I've got a question.
Sure.
I remember the Resaca when it was dry out there. So when did they flood it? And then how do you keep water it? Do you have to buy so much water every year?
That's a great question. So how we keep the Resacas wet and filled is a little nuanced and complicated. It's a dance that we do with the water district. We do buy irrigation water. The water's pumped from the Rio Grande into the park. We had an absurdly wet summer. So in my this is my 5th summer in the park, 4th year there. It was the wettest I've seen. We had water in the park all the way up until like August 18th. And normally in the summertime, we dry everything out so we can get in there and do maintenance. So lots of plants go and grow incredibly fast in the Resaca. So we have to mulch them down or mow them down, or we would lose our open water habitat. We would go from an open water Resaca to various stages of like forest succession. So right now it's dry, which I'm thankful for because we were able to do that maintenance that we couldn't do in June and July because we were so wet. But ideally we would pump water in the fall, so we'd have water for migration for the birds, and we'd dry out a little bit during the dry part of the wintertime and then pump again in the spring, and then whatever we had through the spring and the summer would be supplemented by seasonal rains.
Thank you. You gave a great talk. You're a very easy speaker, easy to listen to. Thank you.
The transition from in-person to online has been definitely a learning curve, and I feel like I'm getting better. I'm a lot less nervous about them than I was in the past. In the past, I was like, oh, I think I'm going to be sick. Oh, no. I always feel more confident in person because you can read the crowd and you can read the faces.
We really appreciate it, Kelly. It was a fantastic presentation. Lots of kudos in the chat box to your ability to articulate the wealth out there in the park. So we really want to thank you for switching gears with us. Kind of was not predictable, and a great program. We really appreciate it. And if there aren't any other questions, that's probably a wrap for this evening. And we thank everyone for joining us, and keep an eye out for emails and messages on our Facebook page of upcoming events and opportunities. Any last words, Kelly?
Thanks for having me. If any of y'all need a site or you're interested in doing any of your volunteer hours, you can just like call the park, reach out on our Facebook, shoot me an email, and I'll hook you up with our volunteer coordinator. It can be in person like Alicia and Susan do with the tram, or if you'd prefer something less people-y and more maintenance-y, I'd be happy to put you on a lawnmower and let you mow trails, or a weed eater to weed eat around signs. So we're looking for both. I get it. Sometimes I'm peopled out too, and I'm like, yeah, I'd rather be on the mower than do a tram ride. So
Great.
you need a site, think about me and give us a call.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you again, and thank you everyone who was able to join us this evening. And on behalf of Robert, y'all have a good evening. Good night.
Have a great night, y'all.